What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Random Richard podcast. I am one of your hosts, Zach, and hosting with me, as always, is Chris. What's going on, buddy?
Hello, everyone. What's up, everyone? Great to have everyone here. And thanks so much for our audience for joining us. And we have an awesome show for us today. We've got some great guests with us today, and it's incredible. Thank you so much for being here, Ashlyn and Rhianna. We are just so thankful. We're so happy that we were able to meet you, and just grateful that you're being on the show and then experience this together. It's going to be wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a special episode for us. We're doing a collaboration with, as you probably saw by the title of this episode, the Duras Sisters Podcast. And they're a great podcast. They talk exclusively Trek, and they talk in depth about a lot of really great topics involving Star Trek. So if you have not listened to them or subscribed to them, be sure to go check them out. But first, I want to ask you guys here on our podcast, what made you guys decide to start a podcast? How did that kind of come about?
Oh man, so we started out just talking about, the thing is that Ashlyn and I talk about Star Trek all the time. So we grew up watching it together and everything. And so we were talking one day about some like really niche in-depth thing about some random Star Trek episode. And I turned to Ashlyn and I'm like, we should just do this, but record it and make it a podcast. And then it kind of sparked from there. And then the pandemic was happening and we realized we have basically nothing to do. We're all, we're sent home from whatever, we had just graduated college. And so we were both thinking, hey, we have time to do this. And so we just decided to start our little pandemic baby podcast, which has then turned into what it is now.
Yeah, and we'd been talking about it since 2019, but at that point, like Rhianna mentioned, she was in her last year of her undergrad. I was in my second year and last year of my master's, so it was impossible to set aside time for that kind of commitment. But then once the pandemic hit, we said, why not? And the way that we do our podcast, because it is all Star Trek, so it does kind of limit us. But of course, there's so much Trek to talk about. We could probably go on for years and years and years. But we look at Trek through a series lens. So we started off, very first series was the pilot episodes. We went through every single pilot from every single series, starting with the original series all the way. We've even reviewed now Strange New Worlds, which is the newest show, I think. And then we've done series like family episodes, love and affection, time travel. Right now we're in our holodeck series, and it's our 10th, or is it the 11th series? I can't remember.
The 11th now.
It's yeah. Crazy. We just hit 100 episodes, and we've loved every minute. It's been really interesting to talk about Trek. Sometimes it gets really serious, like our feminism series had a lot of like serious conversations. Sometimes it's absolute nonsense, like what the holodeck series has been.
Well, that's great. I mean, yeah, Star Trek is something, it's been around long enough. There's enough of it that you could talk about so many different things. And what's great is Star Trek, and this, I don't want to say I'm bashing Star Wars because I'm not, but Star Wars is more strictly for entertainment, right? Like Chris and I have joked before that Star Wars is a space opera about two kids with daddy issues, and and it's great. I love Star Wars. I grew up with Star Wars just as much as Star Trek, but Star Trek is more in depth. It talks and challenges political and socioeconomical things going on currently in the world. And so there's a lot of stuff you can really get in depth with. And then you can kind of have like hokey, campy, geeky conversations about random stuff like, hey, what kind of phaser is that guy carrying, and that kind of stuff. So
exactly. Yeah. And the reason, you were asking why Duras Sisters, why Klingons, we are sisters. You're going to figure out that we are pretty similar as the conversation goes on. So we're actually sisters. We started watching Star Trek together when we were like 10 and 12, maybe even younger. And the most famous siblings, definitely the most famous sisters from Star Trek are the Duras sisters. And they're just a pair that you love to hate. Whenever they're on the screen, you're like, oh man, that House of Duras is back. What kind of trouble are they going to cause? So we're not maybe like going to try to destroy a galaxy full of people in it necessarily, but we are here to cause some trouble and just talk about whatever we want.
Well, if you guys had that kind of power, you'd be rich beyond your imagination, I would guess. But
absolutely. Yeah, we'd be trying to infiltrate the High Council.
Yeah, that's right.
What series did you start off with watching together?
We went in order. So we started off with the original series. That's what our parents had both been, they just had on all the time growing up. So I remember seeing like the Changeling, like the Nomad episode really early on, Kirk fighting the Gore, and like a lot of the classic episodes were just on television a lot. And once the 2009 Star Trek movie came out, we were like, okay, this looks awesome. We want to see like why is this so great? Like, what are the origins of this? So we officially started and watched every single TOS episode, falling asleep through a couple. And then we went on to continue in order of release. So we watched TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, and it took, I think, 5 years just to get through those 5 series, maybe longer, because we were going through school at the same time too. So
Yeah, I mean, we started what I was like probably elementary schooler, and then all the way through middle school, and then Ashlyn had already graduated high school by the time we were watching Enterprise. So it was quite a wild ride. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, where can people find your guys' podcast on social media? What social media platforms are you guys on?
We got them all, I think, are a lot of them. We are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, TikTok. We have a couple of things on YouTube, and then of course our Patreon, which you can donate any amount per month to join. We just have a lot of awesome content out there. We're doing, oh, hi. We're doing a lot for our Patreon right now. We're reviewing the second season of Lower Decks currently. So yeah, we have a lot of fun stuff on our platforms.
that's all of our socials. And then you can listen to us anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I know there's like 30 more, and we're on all of them.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Nice.
okay, since you guys are big Trekkies, we're all Trekkies in the room, virtual room, I should say. What's your favorite Star Trek series? There's only one
Ooh.
correct answer. Chris knows there's only one correct answer, but just kidding. Seriously, though, what's your favorite series?
Ashlyn, you want to go first?
Sure. It's hard to say. I'm gonna say Next Generation because it's been my favorite for the longest. On another day, I might say Deep Space Nine or Voyager, but right now I'm in a big TNG swing, so I'm gonna say Next Gen.
Okay.
Awesome.
Did you hear that, Zach?
Yeah,
Did
no,
you hear
no.
she said the Next
Yeah,
generation?
yeah, no, I was
Yeah?
I was itching my
Sure.
ears. I couldn't, I didn't
Yeah.
hear that exactly specifically. So, Rihanna, what's your favorite?
My favorite is Deep Space Nine. I think
Did you
it's
hear
what
that,
I
Chris? Did you
always
hear
go
that
to.
one? Did you hear
Okay,
that?
we're already
Yes.
split. Here we go.
But we're 2-2. We have to have somebody to break the tie, but that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's a good. That was the correct answer. Rihanna at least answered the correct answer
Woo.
here, so that's good. No, I mean, for me, growing up, I actually watched more TNG than DS9. DS9, it's one of those. It's a show where it's really hard to just catch random episodes because so much of it is tied together, and it was ahead of its time. And that show was kind of made for today's, streaming services and the ability to binge watch stuff. TNG is that new adventure every week kind of thing that Gene Roddenberry had originally envisioned. So you could pick up and watch random episodes typically. But for me, it's always been like 1A, 1B for those two shows. But what about you, Chris?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I love Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but Star Trek: The Next Generation just set the table for so much that came after it. I just have so much like awe and respect and love for it, and love the different themes it explored. So many different important themes, and then character studies all throughout, TNG. So I'll continue to always love it. It's going to be really special for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, all right, we got that out of the way. We got the correct answers and then the not correct answers out of the way. So let's talk about Klingons. That's why we're all here for this, right? For those of you who are tuning in, you saw the title. It's episode Spotlight on Klingons. So let's start with Klingons. I guess I'll kind of maybe ask that question in a different way. What draws the two of you to Klingons? Because obviously there is a draw because you've named your podcast after a certain set of Klingons. So why Klingons and why has that been important to you guys as Trekkies?
Okay, I want to take this first.
Yeah, please
Rihanna,
go
and then
ahead.
you can
Yeah.
butt in. So for me, originally watching Next Generation through, because I mean, TOS just deals with Klingons like they are the villain, and there's not too much to dive into. The movies, it does get a little deeper, but for me, my love for Klingon started in The Next Generation. Worf has always been one of my favorite characters. And the first run through, there was a lot of Klingon episodes that were really long, and it's all about honor. And I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. It's okay. But then the more you like understand and you're watching Worf's journey about he's losing his honor, he gains his honor again, and Picard is helping him, and everything that happens, I just got really drawn into it. And the fact that his character got to continue on Deep Space Nine was a joy for me. So I really like latched onto Worf, and suddenly I'm obsessed with Klingon culture. And I am, instead of saying, oh, why are they so aggressive and annoying, I'm like, yes, power. I love the Klingons. Let's go. And I really admire them and want to take some of their energy into my life.
Just minus the Batleth.
Yes.
Unless, or do you have a replica Batleth hanging on your wall somewhere? That's a question.
I have actually a purse that has a Batleth like cover, but
nice.
no real Batleth. That's kind of a life goal. Is my husband has a Zelda sword, and so that's on our mantle right now, and I'm hoping we can get a Batleth at some point to hang on the wall. So we'll have
you're hoping to replace the Zelda sword with a Batleth.
Yes. When he's asleep, he won't even notice.
There you go.
Rhianna, what about you? Because I feel like maybe you slept through a lot of those Klingon episodes of Next Generation.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't quite as like I wasn't quite as drawn to the Klingons as I was to the Vulcans. I was like, I mean, I still am obsessed with Spock, and I love Vulcan culture. And so I did remember being kind of tired or just like not paying attention as much as I wanted to be in those Klingon episodes. But I think what really draws me to them is the Duras sisters as a first, obviously that's our name. That's what we decided to sort of brand our podcast as. But also they're like women leaders, and that's something so powerful about these two sisters. And they have this incredible bond, and it's just like how similar Ashlyn and I are, except the evil part, It's so it's really cool though, because not a lot of women were even able to get up to that kind of status as a Klingon.
And this is if you're ignoring Discovery for now.
Right, exactly.
I'll hold my comments on that one, but okay.
It does change, but like in the Duras sisters era in Next Gen, they like were scorned for even trying to be on the council. So come on, ladies.
But like these pioneering Klingons who really didn't take no for an answer, and sometimes in a problematic way, but I'm always cheering when they're on the screen is the thing, because they're so fun to hate and to also just love. And so I think a lot of my admiration for Klingons came from them. And of course for Worf, I feel the same way. I love Worf and his entire character journey, and that we get to see more of that in Picard is like really exciting to see how he's evolved even further.
Rhianna's favorite part of Generations is when the Duras sisters take over Geordi's visor. Isn't that right, Rhianna?
No, that's the worst part.
So I'm gonna ask. This is not a controversial question, but it could be. Okay, so I know Rhianna, obviously you picked the correct answer for favorite Star Trek series, but in Deep Space Nine, just like how TNG brings more of that culture, and you get to learn more about the Klingons than you ever did in the original series, vice of the movies. In DS9, we get a whole backstory, and we get to learn so much about the Ferengi. I look at the Ferengi; they're very similar to Klingons in certain respects. Obviously, the Klingons are honor, the Ferengi are profit. But there's a lot of similarities, I feel like, in Ferengi culture, right? You have women aren't supposed to wear clothes, they can't earn profit, all this stuff. In Klingon culture, women aren't supposed to be on the council and be all these warriors and everything else. Do you see any similarities between those two alien races in Star Trek?
I like that. I hadn't thought about the two of those because of like their fundamental difference of like finance versus battles and stuff, but I also think that they're both very like honor, shame, culture, society. Klingons more, but I think Ferengi also hold to a standard like you are shamed if you don't have this much money, or if you don't have this much land or profit or opportunity and stuff. And family is also so deeply entrenched into both cultures, even if it's negatively seen for the women or oppressive. It's still like family is so essential into knowing how much you're going to make. Sure, you can like go out and try to make some prosperity on your own, but really your family name is how Ferengis, sort of I don't know, are intertwined, and that's very, very true for Klingons as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also some of the best Ferengi and Klingon episodes are in Deep Space Nine too.
True.
Yeah, I was gonna say TNG did wonders for furthering the Klingon race, right, and their culture and their background and everything else. Obviously, Worf is, probably like the ambassador of the, the Klingon race because of his importance and how much he's in Star Trek. I think his character, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say his character has some of the most appearances of episodes in all of Star
I
Trek.
think
I don't remember.
so, yeah.
I don't remember if he's the number one or if there's somebody above him, but he's certainly up there in one of the top couple most appearances in Star Trek. So that's really interesting. Where Klingons came from in TOS, they're just a bunch of men running around painted brown, and they were just like these aliens that were villains and everything. And then to how they're portrayed in Next Generation and how they're further, and then DS9, I think furthers them even more because you get to see things like more of Gowron. You get to see some guy named Martok, who becomes a huge part of the Klingon lore and all that stuff. And then you see other characters like in an episode I just watched recently called Blood Oath, right, where Dax goes out and fulfills a blood oath she makes with three other these older Klingon gentlemen. So it's very interesting. It's same thing. In DS9 does the same thing with the Ferengi too. This Ferengi are like these like weird kind of off the wall like space pirates in TNG that have these weird whips to becoming all about profit, and they completely change, even to the point where some of them dress up as women like Quark does in one of the episodes. So interesting.
He does the dirty. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, some of the, Zach, you were talking about Worf, and some of the brilliance of Worf's character is that Worf is exploring his own culture from an outsider a little bit, right? So he's on the outside, as are we. So as are we, like exploring and looking at the Klingon culture from an outsider. So I'm glad like throughout TNG and DS9, you have that complete kind of journey with Worf, kind of exploring all kind of facets of his culture and his own personality. So yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, Chris, I love that you said that because it makes me think of Guinan too, especially when they're like playing their little shooting game together and Guinan's like kicking his ass and like then he's like, Klingons do not laugh, and she's like, yes they do, Worf, like Klingons are laughing constantly, and so he's seen a very specific lens of Klingon culture that can be so vast and varied, just in between different Klingons too, and different situations, that is so hard to pick up on if you haven't been around Klingons your whole life.
Yeah, I mean, Worf is the type of Klingon who, like you're saying, like completely grew up outside of his culture. He grew up in Russia, on Earth,
Minsk.
and so Minsk, and he loves prune juice, and he read about Klingon culture, and he knows that his parents died in the battle, like at the Khitomer Accords, and so he's like a bookworm about Klingons, but he knows so much about. He's obsessed like with the rituals. He practices everything. He's very studious, very serious about it. So then when he is actually serving on Klingon ships in some episodes, he is really out of place, even amongst his own race, which I just think is really interesting to watch, and how much he changes. And when he meets Dax, she even says, like, why are you taking this so seriously? Like, you're so different from other Klingons that I've met.
Yeah, especially in the episode You're Cordially Invited, where they get married and she's got to prove herself to Martok's wife. And Worf is so dead set on following this specific ritual because now at that point, right, Worf is part of the house of Martok. So she's got to impress his wife. And she's not buying it. This is stupid. Like, why am I doing this? And he's like, you must do this, and so.
Yeah. It nearly breaks them apart almost, like they almost call off the wedding because of that and because of their differences. And Worf has always wanted the big Klingon wedding with all the trimmings, as Dax says, and so if anything goes off book, he just sort of freaks out. And it's understandable, but it's also like, Worf, my dude, like there's so many different ways to be a Klingon. It's not just one,
Worf is struggling. Worf struggles on what does it mean to be a Klingon, right? So he's all the things that he has learned about, like on Earth and when he was growing up amongst humans, and he's studying all these pieces of literature on this is what it is to be a Klingon. You have a certain belief and you have a certain system of behavior on what a Klingon is. And so Worf is completely struggling with that, like throughout his career and throughout his life. So
I think
exactly.
if TNG had been not episodic and had more connected episodes, they could have really dived in deeper to his relationship with Alexander, his son, because the fact that he is such a serious Klingon and he's raising a son who doesn't even want to be in the Klingon culture, he hates Klingons. He was much more on the side of his mother who dies, so sad. And she was half Klingon, and she's like, thinks, oh, those stuffy rituals, I'm not about it. And Alexander just is very reluctant to take place in anything going on in Worf's life, and he's just so obsessed with his culture. So I it's such a struggle for him, and I love that. I mean, he's a terrible father. Like, I love Worf, but like, oh my gosh, he's a terrible father. But
Yeah.
It's interesting to see like his struggle with that. And I wish we had had more time with Alexander in DS9. We do see him in Your Quarterly Invited, and I know in Picard season 3 that the big controversy has been Worf has a line that says, I'm what is it, like, I'm peaceful
I'm a
now.
pacifist now.
Pacifist,
Yeah.
I'm a
yeah.
pacifist, and I'm wondering, is that because of Alexander? Because that's Alexander's whole thing too, is he wants to be a Klingon and not be a warrior.
Yeah, like
So
Firstborn, and that's the reason that like Alexander became a pacifist, was in that alternate future. It's just crazy. I don't know what they're
there's a
trying to
lot
weave
going
here
on.
in Picard. Yeah.
I hope they explain it, because if they just come, Worf just shows up and says, I'm a pacifist now, and we're all supposed to go, oh, okay. Like, no, like,
Right.
I personally, I saw that, and that kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. I have a hard time viewing Worf and buying him as a pacifist based on everything we've seen about him, right? I just, hopefully they explain that in a good way, and it's not just set up so that they don't have to see an older Michael Dorn, running around trying to fight. So I'll keep my
Yeah.
mind open, but I'm a little skeptical, to be honest with you, on that part.
Yeah, I know it's probably for a writing perspective of like, we don't want Worf to just be the heavy, to just always be the security officer guy,
Yeah.
like taking down people. But I do hope that it's like, please give us a solid explanation, and I hope they do his character justice, because I also am curious about like Klingons in Picard era and stuff, because we haven't seen a ton of them.
Yeah.
I don't want to overpower the podcast with like Picard season 3 discussions, but I do think like Worf as a character deserves his own Worf show like Picard got, because if they're
Yes.
going to drop something in that completely changes who he is as a character, I have a feeling they're not going to have time to explain like the full rich depth of how that change happened, if he like had an event that like traumatized him, or it like changed his life or something. I don't know. I hope we get that satisfaction, like what you're saying, Zach.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's my Targ in the background. If you can hear River, so he's barking. I could see Worf as a pacifist. So
Really?
yeah. So I'll say this is my own like personal philosophy, but I could see why. So if Worf is someone that has kind of come up through he's seen a lot of battles and war in the Federation, and then experienced his significant battles as part of his assignment in Deep Space Nine, and part of his involvement with Klingons. So I could see him, if he has a long career of experiencing all this suffering as part of battles. I could see that being the next step, like in the evolution of someone like that, right? So he's seen what it is to have all of these battles, and everyone thinking that it's great to die in honor, and then his own personal kind of losses. I could see it coming around where he's seen the effect, kind of that collateral damage it's had on his friends and his people, and I could see that kind of next step of someone like that becoming a pacifist.
Yeah, that's possible. I was just thinking, if I were king for a day and I were a writer in that room, maybe I would explain it as well. He was never able to get over the death of Jadzia. And so Jadzia died right during the middle of the Dominion War, right? I mean, albeit by a possessed Dukat. I still cannot watch that episode. Every time I watch
Oh,
the DS9,
no.
I
Yeah.
skip that episode
Same.
because it
Mhm.
was a horrible, horrible way to kill Jadzia off in that show. But that's a
Yeah.
whole other story. But yeah, I could see that, Chris. Maybe that's the whole Dominion War and the fighting they did in the movies, with the Romulans and first contact with the Borg and then losing Jadzia, maybe it all just came to head and it was just too much.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
also wonder because like so much of Star Trek is like they're trying to show the people who are like the activists of their culture too. And so I'm really curious because we have not seen much Klingons or like any Klingons in Picard season 3 or even the era of shows that are coming out like Lower Decks. There's some Klingons, but we don't have like the politics of everything going on too. So I'm wondering if there isn't like a pacifist movement that Worf is leading because the Klingons are evolving or there's this new sect happening. I wouldn't be surprised. And we have like so much info about the politics going on with Gowron becoming the president or like becoming the chancellor in Next Generation, and then we follow him all the way through Deep Space Nine. He's a classic politician. I want to know more about what's happening on Kronos and is everyone okay? What's happening with the Klingons?
Yeah, that's true. Well,
Really.
especially because in what was it, Star Trek 6, right? Where the Praxis moon gets destroyed and they talk about how the Klingons only have like 50 years left and they're all gonna die or
Yeah.
whatever. They're gonna all,
Mhm.
they don't have enough resources and all this stuff. I mean, that was obviously TNG, DS9, that whole time is more than 50 years past where Star Trek 6 was, but does that come into play at some point? I mean, that was mentioned, it's canon, so does that have any effect or do they somehow overcome that?
Great point.
Yeah.
Has that
Yeah,
even been
that-
brought up?
I
I
don't
mean-
think so. I've never heard it brought up anything in Star Trek other than Star Trek 6.
Yeah.
My guess, honestly, would be that like because the destruction of Praxis sort of started up the Khitomer Accords and like the history of Klingons connecting with Starfleet and making this alliance. And I think that maybe they probably just put their best science minds together to help save Kronos or something, or help save everyone. But yeah, it's so interesting they just left that out because it's such a huge pinnacle moment in Klingon history and in Starfleet history.
I'm sure there are listeners who are like, "Oh, I play Star Trek or
Yeah.
Star Trek Online," and the answer like is in that part of the game. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry to everyone. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I want to say they make reference to the Khitomer Accords in DS9, but I it's been too long since I've seen it, so I'm not.
Yeah, I believe they do because the Federation and Klingons are like love-hate, right? Like they go back and forth in being they're like frenemies, right? Like they go back and we're friends today, but tomorrow we might be enemies, and then we're enemies and now we're friends, and it's like the flavor of the week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they're allies. I feel like they are a part of the Federation to an extent, but like there's episodes like where Worf just straight up leaves the Enterprise to go be on Gowron's ship.
Resigns.
Yeah, and then even in DS9, I feel like at some point like they're enemies with the Federation because or I can't remember.
Yeah.
So it is a really
Yeah, they are because they align themselves with the Cardassians at one point, right?
Yes.
So there is
like changeling Gowron. That was insane.
Yeah, that's right. When he's
Yeah.
in
That
the
whole
camp with
plot,
Bashir.
yeah.
Oh God, yeah.
it makes me
Lots
wonder
more
though.
talk, but yeah, sorry.
With the writing in DS9, like did they just not know what they wanted to do with the Klingons in there, or was that intentional of them to flip flop back and forth to keep you guessing? I guess that was always a question I had. Like, why the back and forth with the Klingons? I mean, to further the plot or to keep you on your toes, or because they're like, oh yeah, let's throw the Klingons in this. Sure, that sounds good. Everybody knows what the Klingons are, so let's do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think oh, sorry.
Go ahead. You're gonna say probably the same thing.
No, you're fine. Yeah. I think it also demonstrates sort of the truth of war and how like even within our world wars we've had power shift, and like change sides when needed. And even like with the Romulans coming in is sort of like, bringing the Soviet Union on our side for World War II, thinking about that. And so maybe it's them even providing sort of like historical context to like, this is how war can sometimes be, and sometimes you just don't expect the Klingons to join the Cardassians, and here they are, but like they're able to rope them back in because I think eventually they realize that the honorable choice is Starfleet over, the Dominion and the Cardassian creating their union. Yeah,
That's true. Yeah.
And they had a spat of like bad leadership too, right? I think in some of
Yeah.
that DS9, the Klingons did some bad leaders.
totally.
Absolutely. And
Well,
as
yeah,
much as
it started
I
with
loved-
Gowron. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
I loved Gowron in Next Generation. I was like, yes, Gowron's here.
Yeah.
But we see him make some really questionable decisions in Deep Space Nine. And that's why I say he's a classic politician, because he's not really the person you want to vote for, but he's the person you have. So might as well
Yeah.
just like support him, because he's the only thing standing between the Klingons completely siding with the Dominion. So whatever,
Or
you
it's like
know.
only thing between him and the brother Duras, which like never should be on
Ever
the
brother
council.
Duras.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that just dives into the Klingons as a whole. Their culture is very complex. I mean, people think like, oh, they're just a bunch of brute dudes who run around and kill each other and then die in battle. But it's very complex. You know, I've noticed from all the different encounters with the Klingons in different episodes. You know, going back to something like loyalty, right? Where oh, you're not going to support the Supreme Chancellor and everything like that. And so this ultimatum and ultimate authority, and the idea of, well, if you don't support him, then you have no honor. If you don't obey this person, then you have no honor. And the idea of family, and your house is your family, and these rituals and stove accord, all these things, there's so much interwoven within the Klingon culture. It's very, very complex. And I mean, and obviously a lot of Trekkies know that, but there's a lot who probably don't really realize how complex their culture actually is.
Yes,
Yeah, especially. Oh, sorry, please go.
I think the Klingons fall under the trap, honestly, that Kirk falls into a lot. And hang on with me now, because I think a lot of people think James T. Kirk is like running around, like fighting everyone, punching everyone he can, like sleeping with every woman. But in reality, he is like, yeah, he's a go-getter, but he is very thoughtful and he's very intelligent. That he was described as like walking books in the academy. So there's like there can be a really huge difference between what like the outside fandom thinks of Kirk and what he actually is. And I think the same goes for Klingons. They think, oh, they're the enemy. Like, we got to fight them. In every situation, they're bad, but they're incredibly complicated. And they are a proud race overall. But there's just, like you were saying, Zach, there's so much complexity with them.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. It's very interesting as you break it down and you look through their culture and all the different rituals and everything. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize like all of this stuff, right? And Chris and I were talking about a lot of this stuff before we did this episode, and we started looking at, okay, well, what are some of the important Klingon episodes that are out there, right? Like, what are some of the where in Star Trek is this stuff being shown? How exactly are we seeing the complexity of things? And so we started looking at stuff like, okay, well, what do we see in TNG and DS9 and Voyager Enterprise and all that stuff? Are there some specific episodes that stand out to you guys is that kind of show what we're talking about, this idea of honor and their houses and their rituals and all that kind of stuff?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm wearing my Picard is my Chadich shirt today. And so that, of course, reminds me of this entire arc of TNG that Picard assists in helping them get a new chancellor after he's poisoned. And this is when, of course, we get the whole Duras Sisters plot and ploy to try to get their little like nephew on the council. It's just insane. And so this, though, we get to see that Worf has been struggling with like his father getting framed for, all of this very convoluted stuff about the family, and that Worf, being son of Moog, then has completely had dishonor on his house because of this supposed betrayal. And it's so complex. I love that those episode arcs really stand out to me.
And I think that's like reunion.
Or redemption, or they all have
Redemption's like the Civil War.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you, Rhianna. That's whenever Picard is the Chadij is like epic tier episodes for me. I also really like there's a episode in Voyager actually where B'Elanna has to go on the barge of the dead, and because I think she like doesn't think her mom is going to get into Stovacor, and so she has to like go on the barge of the dead, like simulate death to like talk to her and make up with her. And again, like I love Star Trek because these religions that everyone is about, like the Bajorans and the Klingons, their afterlives are real. Like the prophets are real. The barge of the dead is a real place. So I love that the Klingons are actually like on their way to Stovacor. So I love episodes that also go really in depth in the lore and the backstory. Every time they talk about Kalis, I'm like, nice. Like the Klingons killed their gods because they were like, screw you guys, we want to rule ourselves. So I'm a big like lore person too. So any type of those episodes are awesome for me.
Yeah, I like, I think I had either seen an interview or read it somewhere that Gene Roddenberry, obviously when he created the original series and then even early on in Next Gen before he passed, really didn't bring a ton of religion into Star Trek. It wasn't until like when Rick Berman and Michael Piller took over. And then obviously you see that shift in DS9 where religion becomes a huge emphasis in the series, like you mentioned, Ashlyn, with the Bajorans, and they're an incredibly deeply religious race. And the Klingons, you see more of that in DS9 with their religion and Stovacor. You see that in Enterprise, like you mentioned, with the Barge of the Dead. So I found it very interesting that change and that turn and a new focus that Star Trek started to look into that they really didn't spend much time on before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it as I think it's very good that they did do that turn, because the exploration of the mythos with the Bajorans and the mythos of the Klingons is really, there's a lot of reflection in that with our own cultures, right? You can compare that to a lot of mythos that we've got with the Norse and the Vikings and what they study, or the Greeks and the Egyptians and what they believe in the afterlife and what they thought it was like a real tangible afterlife to go in. So I think it's terrific that Star Trek's exploring all of these afterlife like lores within the different cultures that it has, because they're all taking it is very real to them as it is to all of our cultures here. So yeah, that's a great kind of turn in what Star Trek did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and also like I love the fact that on top of rituals, they also have rituals and stuff that they're able to practice, and Worf is able to practice on like the holodeck and things. I love when we get little snippets of an episode where Worf has to do his rite of ascension, or he's trying to teach Alexander the fundamentals of Klingon fighting and all of these different practices, but some of them can cause like this ethical controversy, like when Worf has like is paralyzed yeah in TNG, or I was thinking the Deep Space Nine one where his brother Kern comes on and wants him to like wants Worf to kill him, and so Sisko is totally against it. He's like, I know we have to respect the religious rights of people, but not to the point where they're like killing each other.
Yeah, assisted suicide, that topic, right?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, that's what Star Trek does so great, right? Where it takes very controversial subjects and things that either you can't talk about in normal shows and movies, or if you do, they're going to, probably not do well, right? And you can put it in the future and put it in science fiction, and you can talk about those things and you can address them, make people think. Star Trek makes you think, and that's what I think is so fascinating about it and so great about it. Every time I watch Star Trek, any episode from any series, if there's something that makes you think in there, almost every time I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that way this time. I've watched this episode 30 times, but I didn't think about this time. You know what I mean? So it keeps you thinking, it keeps you engaged. It's not just entertainment. It's not Michael Bay explosions in your face Transformers where you can just sit back and drool and not even think, so.
Absolutely. Well, I even find myself like having watched Star Trek through so many different ages, having completely opposite opinions than I did even a couple years ago. So you're totally right. You see new things every time and you're like, wow, my opinion on assisted suicide has changed, even though, yeah, whatever. And you're also talking about rituals. For me, when I first saw You're Cordially Invited, which we've already talked about, I vowed as a teenager, I'm gonna find a husband who also wants a Klingon wedding, and that didn't happen. But
that didn't happen, did it?
It did not, unfortunately.
No,
but I know there's a parallel universe where I had a Klingon wedding, so I'm just very happy for that, Ashlyn. She had a great day.
Got to wear the dress and everything.
Yes.
It's funny you mentioned that, because when I was engaged to my now wife, I tried to get her to do our vows in Klingon, and I was shot down. So I even
Darn.
and then I was like, well, okay, if we don't do our vows in Klingon, because she's not a Star Trek, she does not like Star Trek at all. I'm like, how do we get together? But anyways,
Yeah.
so then I was like, well, how about we do our like wedding invitations in Klingon? She's like, that's idiotic. No one's gonna know what that says. And no, I'm like, all right. So I think somewhere in an alternate universe, we had a wedding where we had
I think
Klingon
it
vows.
happened. Yeah, absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
I believe
Yep.
it.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of episodes that I saw. Chris, are there any specific episodes that you can think of from any of the series that really stood out to you as far as exploring in depth kind of the Klingon culture and stuff we've been talking about?
Yeah, one that I saw like not too long ago. This is not so much maybe Klingon culture, but it was funny. I finally got to the episode in Enterprise where they I think it was called Affliction, where they kind of explore, hey, the physiological differences between the Klingons that we see in TOS and the Klingons that we see now. So I thought that was pretty that was fun to watch and fun to kind of see. And then you tie it back. I think you tie it back to something Worf said, right? Worf says, "Oh, we don't talk about that." Said something funny about that. So that always comes to my mind. I liked that. I liked finally seeing that in Star Trek Enterprise. I'd heard about it for a while, and it was great to kind of finally see it and kind of laugh about it. So that was great. That was one that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I know people will like shit on Enterprise and stuff, but it's so good for these like really specific things, retconning things and like helping us give more of a backbone to the Federation and to Klingons during this time. I love that Archer and Kang get to have this like whole dialogue, and him and T'Pol and Reed and everyone is helping him get back to Kronos, and they have that sort of like first contact with humans, with Archer. That's such a cool way to sort of introduce us to the Klingons and say like there was tentatively like could have been more peace if things hadn't really gone to hell after. But that, yeah, too, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Chris, of just like the whole thing with the plague breaking out and their ridges disappearing. That's just a genius way of making that happen.
I mean, it makes total sense that they would do that. So the Klingons are part of them that they want to have stronger and more powerful warriors. So if they find the idea that, hey, perhaps there's some genetic enhancements that can make that happen and they can make their warriors stronger, they would surely do that. So you could totally see them wanting to explore that and say, hey, yeah, we can make greater and better warriors, and then it backfiring, and then
Totally.
trying to figure out, okay, what do we do now? Because it's killing us. So yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't care what anybody says. I think I will never crap on Enterprise. I love Enterprise. I think it's but for amongst most Trekkies I know, I think it's woefully underrated. It's woefully underappreciated. I think it was a crying shame that it only got 4 seasons, and it barely got. I mean, it might not even have gotten 3 or 4 seasons. There was talks of it being canceled after 2. I think it was just an unfortunate set of timing, from what I've heard in interviews, that it was kind of the idea where by the time they got to Enterprise, people were just kind of tired of Star Trek. If that kind of, I mean, being on TV, like it was exhaustion for the franchise. Had it been made at a different time, had it been made like right now or at a different time, I think it would have gotten more than 4 seasons. It was so good. And season 4, they were getting right to the time where they could have covered the Romulan Earth Wars and all those great things, and the amount of amazing stories that could have come out of that series. Not that they didn't have amazing before, because they did. But I love Enterprise. I think it's fantastic. I think it's woefully underappreciated.
I'm with
Yes,
you.
period.
Season 3 and 4 are like, there are some really gold nuggets in those episodes, and I just wish they had time to make a just like keep going, have a satisfying ending. I hate talking about the finale, but
Yeah, the finale's terrible.
Cursed. Yeah.
But I will say, and this could be controversial, but maybe it's not, but I don't care anyways. I actually think if you look at all the Star Trek series, right, toss through Enterprise or even in the new stuff, Enterprise itself might have the best first season. Most of the series had some clunky episodes, like TNG had Code of Honor and all those other terrible episodes. Move Along Home and in DS9. Voyager has a few like episodes in the first season. But Enterprise, I mean, I don't know. I thought the first season as a whole was pretty good from beginning to end. And not every episode was a winner, but it was a pretty darn good first season. I think it had the best first season of any of the Trek series.
Yeah, like tonally, I think too, they knew what they were going into. And with a show like Deep Space Nine, they knew they wanted to be episodic, but also have overarching plots or 3-parters or 7-parters. But like they weren't sure by season 1 what the show's tone was going to be. But I think Enterprise, they just were like, yeah, we know exactly what we're shooting for. And that stayed pretty consistent throughout, which is amazing. And we get Faith of the Heart. So like, I'm not mad about it.
Yeah, that's true. But it is interesting, in the pilot episode of all things that they could have put in the pilot episode of Enterprise, we get a Klingon on Earth, which ties it back to, the significance of the roles Klingons play in Star Trek. I mean, outside of maybe the Vulcans, the Klingons might be the most recognizable alien in Star Trek to people. And I'm thinking people specifically that are not Star Trek fans. Like if you say Klingons, a lot of people are going to know what that means. And they may have never watched Star Trek before.
Absolutely.
It's kind of used as like the nerdy stamp. Like I'm thinking that Frasier episode where he like realizes he's actually speaking Klingon the whole time because his son was trying to get back at him, and that's just sort of like a nerdy
During
reference.
Like his bar mitzvah.
Yeah. So good. And so, but that's like, oh yeah, that's that nerdy Star Trek thing. If I hear Klingon, like it's so true. It's very recognizable.
Yeah.
Also,
and are there...
It's one of the first languages like developed for fantasy, like, I mean, the Klingon language is like legit. Like I saw you had the Klingon dictionary before. I have my copy as well. Yeah. Like it's legit. And I know like Lord of the Rings, once the movies were developed, like Elvish was created. And now it's pretty commonplace, I think, if you're like deep in lore, to have a language that actually like makes phonetic sense. But I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like Klingon was one of the first like fictional languages that was invented, and it's Star Trek.
Yeah. Chris and I were just looking at this yesterday. There are actual like community colleges and stuff where you can take Klingonese as an actual accredited class. Like I believe it's an official language too.
Yeah.
I believe it's recognized as that, and that's from Star Trek.
I actually found out that in the 90s, some mental hospitals were hiring people who spoke Klingon because some of the people who were like in these hospitals were speaking Klingons to their doctors and they didn't understand them.
Wow.
I was shocked.
Need a translator.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, what?
I've
like,
never heard that. Have you heard that before, Chris? I've never heard that before.
No,
I
never.
heard that on Now Playing Podcast when they were doing their Star Trek movies review. Arnie, the main guy, he said he was approached to work in a mental hospital because he spoke Klingon. He was like, I don't speak it that well. Like,
I can't like translate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wild.
Yeah. I have here the Klingon Hamlet in the original, and side by side you have the Klingon and then the English, and so it's just so great. Like I love that so much of Star Trek is Klingon, and like we have so much awesome products and like just very deep references that I was like, I have to get Hamlet in its original Klingon. Come on.
I mean, you've never experienced Shakespeare unless you've experienced it in its original Klingon, right? That's what we've been told all lives, right?
All along.
Yeah, of all, in the Klingon houses, of all the kind of back maneuvering that Klingon individuals do in the houses, I could completely see like something like Hamlet like occurring in one of the Klingon houses. That's how much like maneuvering that they do. So it's pretty.
I think that's why they're such big Shakespeare fans. They're like, yes, this is so like gory and like so much in-house murdering. Like that's what we do.
100%. One of my favorite episodes that involves Klingons in all of Star Trek, and okay, you're gonna say, oh yeah, you're gonna roll your eyes, but it is a DS9 episode, and that is the episode The House of Quark from season 3, where Quark gets wrapped in on a fake marriage because he's trying to help save this female Klingon's house after
Lady
her husband
Grilka.
killed Lady Grilka, and then of course she comes back, I think, in another episode, right? And he's really good with numbers, and she isn't, and they do this like real quick fake kiss almost, to consummate the marriage, whatever, and she thinks he's disgusting and vile, but then she starts to kind of fall for him, and it's quite the little story. And that's kind of why I talked about earlier on when we were talking about so much similarities between Klingons and Ferengis. They're very different in many regards, but there's a lot of similarities with their culture. And I just found that very fascinating to see such polar opposites, right? Like, the two people you never think of seeing together, right? Like me and Gal Gadot. You'd never, ever in a million years see that happen, like Ferengi with a Klingon, and so you see that and you're like, okay, Ferengi and a Klingon. No one would ever suspect that or predict that. That was just kind of like a one-off episode that I thought was really fascinating.
Absolutely.
And fun too. And fun.
Yeah. Oh, it's so much fun. And I love that Lady Grilka gets a bit of an arc here with the 2 episodes, like you were saying. And just again, want to reiterate how amazing also just female Klingon characters are, and how every single time a female Klingon comes on screen, I'm like, this is going to be 10 times better now, because I'm thinking about Kalar coming on in TNG for those 2 episodes, and Grilka, and even I think it's Sorella is Martok's wife's name, and even she is just like so terrifying and awesome. And I love getting to see how the women play a role in Klingon culture, and even if it's sort of perceived less as a like leadership roles and more in these sort of like, not as much as human, like women get sort of stereotyped into these like housekeeping roles, but definitely sort of like, oh, the wife of this chancellor or this very, important person, quote unquote. But also Klingon women do get to fight alongside their men. And so there are these differences, but, with especially compared to Ferengis, who like women can't even leave planet. But yeah, I just adore getting to see all these incredible women playing these really awesome Klingons.
Yeah, I think female Klingons definitely, you see it more in DS9, but a little bit in TNG, like you mentioned. They add a very unique dynamic. I loved You're Cordially Invited more than the wedding. I love the fact that you got to see Martok's wife, and you could tell she's in charge of that house. Even Martok says, I'm scared of her, like she's in charge. She's a badass. And she's, you can tell she's the one that rules the roost. I kind of joke with some of my buddies that I work with, like, when I reference my wife, I call her the house commander, like, oh, who's calling? Oh, my house commander's calling. I got to call her back, kind of thing. So his wife is kind of that way. And so I do think that adds a unique dynamic that you see that Klingon women, while you don't necessarily see them on the front lines in battle all the time, like in Star Trek and these big battle scenes that Klingons are in, they have a very unique and carved out role within Klingon culture and society.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite aspects too about Klingon women, like, I'm so glad you brought up Grilka. She's like amazing. I love that we get to see women on screen that are really emotional and really passionate, because so often like women are told, oh, like it's not a good look for you to be emotional right now, like get out of here. Klingons use that passion and emotion as a strength, and that's how they are able to like navigate their lives. So for me, it's really inspiring to see someone who is being led by their emotions, and they know like, this is the right choice for me. I'm doing the thing that I know is right, and I'm trusting my emotions in this case. So that was really powerful for me to see, as also just to see that whenever there's a Klingon woman on stage, Worf is freaking out, and he's like, he loves to see the passion. And I mean, I love Worf, so whoever he loves, I also love.
By proxy. Yeah. And I think Ashlyn too, like anger, like women are allowed to be angry as Klingons. And
Yes.
I think anger is something that like women were told never to be, or else you're seen as like, oh, she's on her period, or oh, she's crazy, or whatever the excuse may be. And just Klingon women do not get that, because they are, as a race, more like, volatile and hostile, and just have more passion that comes from this like deep fire of anger. And it's cool to see that women get to express that too.
Yeah, I would consider Jadzia kind of a mini extension of the Klingon culture, because of her worm, her Dax's, past with the Klingons. So I think Dax was kind of that same way, right? Like, you saw her angry quite a bit. It was okay, she's not Klingon, but I think they did a good job of highlighting that it was okay for her to get angry too. It's okay for her to show those emotions. Whether that's because, oh, she's a symbiote, or not, but I think they did that a good job with her too.
Yeah, those the Klingon female roles and those that played them did excellent, because one of the things I think they are able to teach people very well is that it is okay to be confident, right? It is completely okay to be confident in like who you are, like as a person, like where you came from as a culture. And I think in Star Trek and those female Klingons, no matter if they were heroes or villains, because it was the same on the villain side too, right? They exuded confidence in who they were, and they were completely actualized. So I thought that was great, and that's very much people can look to that like as role models and say, yeah, it's completely okay to be confident in who you are. So that was great.
Yeah, I
For
love
sure. And
that.
I
Yeah.
want to shout B'Elanna too. I know we haven't
I
talked
was
about
just gonna say
Voyager
that.
that
Yeah.
much, but we can't leave out B'Elanna Torres. She's
Yeah.
half Klingon, but this is her whole issue. Like this is her whole battle is trying to figure out like what do I do with my anger? Because as a human, it's not acceptable for me to be an angry human, but as a Klingon, everyone wants me to be angry and emotional. So this is that battle going on inside of her. And I love B'Elanna. So gotta shout one out
Yeah.
for her.
And the fact that she gets to like grow into her own version of being a Klingon, just as Worf does, and luckily we get enough time with these characters to see them grow. It's similar to Spock's journey, and we have a lot of characters who go through similar experiences, but it's really interesting to watch someone like B'Elanna who really dislikes a lot of herself because of her Klingon DNA and just her Klingon sort of tendencies, and the whole thing with like her wanting to erase the Klingon from her baby's DNA, shows this like deep-seated like guilt or just even just shame of being a Klingon. And so
Yeah.
to see her start to shed that as the season progresses and as she's, finally able to have the baby and realize, wow, like this person is perfect as they are, just as I am. And what a cool story. I love that we get even more depth within Klingon culture through B'Elanna Torres as well.
Yeah, I always wondered, especially very early on, like first season of Voyager, if B'Elanna's anger and outbursts that she had at times, was that due to her being part Klingon, or was that due to her time in the Maquis? Because I mean, the Maquis are, at least considered by the Federation to be terrorists and so forth, and Cardassians consider them terrorists as well. Is it because she's part of the Maquis as well? Because the Maquis, I mean, did you meet many Maquis in Star Trek that weren't angry at life? Basically, they were running around like, we're just angry. We got to blow something up.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder, or maybe it was just twofold. Like she was, because she's part Klingon and because she's part of the Maquis, she has all this built up inner rage, and she doesn't really know how to let it out. And then of course she eventually, because she can't stand Tom Paris in the beginning, which I think is hilarious, and then she comes to, obviously they get married and everything, but Tom Paris is more like that cool cat, like, yeah, whatever, man, like just kind of go with the flow, like California surfer dude, and hang 10 dude, very laid back and chill, versus B'Elanna, who was much more, at least early on, like angry and stuff. And I'm curious on your guys' take, what you thought. Was that more her Klingon, Maquis, both? What do you think?
I mean, what is it Chakotay says about Suitor, that like I tend to find people for the Maquis who already have sort of a violent tendency or are just like more willing to fight, and more willing to make these tough decisions that Starfleet won't make. And so I think, yes, that definitely Maquis is a part of it. But I think that B'Elanna is so angry at her Klingon self that just manifests in this really like dark and difficult way for her. And it's really hard to shed that burden of like hating a part of yourself that you can't control, that is also, sort of has a more like, I don't know, aggressive tendencies or whatever we want to call it. But definitely, I think it's a mix.
I think it goes back. I'm with you, Rhianna. It's a mix. I think it goes back to like so many things do, unresolved childhood trauma, because she grew up on a colony of humans and her mom was kind of like absentee, almost like she was around, but she was like getting a divorce with her dad, and her dad ended up completely abandoning the family. And B'Elanna always thought, it's my fault. It's because I'm so emotional and I'm a Klingon, and it's because of my mom who's emotional and she's a Klingon. And so she just put that blame on herself, like my dad left because of me. And then she just like tried to go to Starfleet. She tried to do the path. She got kicked out of Starfleet. She can't find her place in the world except for the Maquis. And that's where, like Rhianna said, so many people find their home with other people who are others, who are outcasts. And it's a cause that's really worthy. Like I even think for myself, I'm probably a pacifist, but like, would I join the Maquis? Because it's terrible what the Federation did to the colonists that are just getting attacked by the Cardassians. So I don't know. I think B'Elanna's complicated, and she does like deal with her family issues as time goes on, but I think it really informs a lot of who she is.
I think that's great. The great thing with Star Trek, right? So you get these episodes, these Klingon centric episodes, right? And apart from the costumes and being in the future and the forehead ridges, I find myself watching Klingon episodes saying, okay, put myself in that person's shoes, right? Just kind of like how you mentioned, Ashlyn, with the Maquis. How would I respond? Would I respond in a fit of rage and anger, or is that just when I play Xbox? But anyways, or would I take a different approach? You know what I mean? So it's really fascinating. Even with the alien species, I still find myself saying with Ferengi or with the Andorians and Enterprise is how would I respond? Yes, I have a different approach as a human or a human, but how would I respond in those situations? And with the Klingons, it's no different. If that was my family, would I die to protect them? Or if I had to go to battle, would I do that? All those types of things that run through my head.
Yeah, Zach, I like what you were saying there. It also got me thinking about some of the things you were talking about earlier in the episode with like assisted suicide and like how would respond. But I think of the races here and Klingons, there's also the aspect of what gives someone value. What gives someone value, and what I mean by that, right, is so Klingons hold these things like their houses in honor in such high regard, or at least in such high regard from Worf's perspective, right? So he thinks his name was everything, his honor is everything, and his ability to fight is everything, right? So when those are like gone, when you don't have honor, when your house doesn't have honor, or when your physical abilities to fight is maybe not as it was, what gives you value? And so I think that was great for Worf to explore, and for the Klingons to explore, and for Star Trek itself to explore. And when they explore those kinds of episodes, like what would you do? Like how would you feel? Like what would you feel gives you value? So I think that was all great. And I think within Star Trek, they're looking for, they do explore things like, hey, your intrinsic value is so much more than what you perceive is honor, or what you perceive as honor within your house. There's so much more that you can contribute. So it made what you guys had been saying earlier made me kind of think about those things, and I thought this is such like a great thing for Star Trek to explore, kind of on an outside level. Yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
And I love what they. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. I think also because, Chris, what you're saying about like exploring sort of the path for different Klingons, Alexander really gets to explore sort of his, like how does he react in a Klingon world and in a Starfleet world? He's kind of both, one foot in each world. And I think that it's really interesting to watch him choose his own path and like where he feels the most glorified, or not glorified, where he feels the most like important and useful, because for so long on the Klingon ships he was feeling just useless and like, oh man, I'm getting everything wrong, but I just think that like if Alexander can find that path, then it's just really cool to watch him look for that journey, because how do you like count your worth in such an honor shame based society when so much is built off of that? And if you're not like this pure Klingon, then you're not worthy of something or another, when really like a lot of times you prove yourself just through the heart of battle, and that's what like Worf and him both have to realize.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about Worf is that right before TNG, you had the original series Klingons. You didn't know a ton about them, but they're supposed to be warriors and they're evil villains and everything, right? And they're the bad guys for an episode or two here and there. And then you get into TNG, and then early on, it's just there's a Klingon there, but he looks different if you were a TOS fan, and he's part of the crew and everything. But then as he develops more and more, I think, at least from my perspective, you begin to see them write Worf in a way that helps to, I think, break stereotypes that people may have against Klingons, right? You're going to have the stereotypical Klingons that show up in any Klingon episode, but then you have someone like Worf, who's not a stereotypical Klingon, right? And I think it's great that you say, hey, just because he looks like other Klingons doesn't mean he's the same, right? And so it kind of goes the idea of just because somebody looks a certain way doesn't mean that they fit a stereotype, good, bad, or indifferent. And so I think that also teaches us something in that regard.
Yeah. And like, I mean, that could also, we can think of it that way too for the like Star Trek 2009 Klingons, you know, or the Discovery Klingons. Like,
oh, let's not talk about Discovery
Klingons. They do look different for sure, you know. And
Yeah.
2009, or not 2009, Into Darkness, I think sort of started that trend of like, let's make these Klingons look really punk.
Rhianna and I, we were talking about this a little bit today before the recording, and I had read I think it was a tweet or a comment on some post about Klingons where somebody said, what if they look different just because they're from different sections of the planet, like different parts of Kronos, because they're different species of Klingon? And my mind was blown. I had never thought of that ever, because I was pissed when I saw those Into Darkness Klingons. I was kind of pissed when I saw Discovery, and now I'm like, oh my God, am I racist? Like, oh no, like, yeah, the Klingons look totally different in this show, but maybe they're from a different area.
They're also from Southern Kronos. Like, I don't know.
You never know. You can't just think that things are simple, because it's very complicated.
I guess I still, now that we're at this part of the show, I still don't like the Discovery Klingons personally. I don't know. They look bizarre. It's like they're like trying to combine the Klingons with like aliens or something. Like not aliens, like generic aliens, like the franchise alien. I don't know. It's just really weird to me the way they did it. I guess I'm a little bit of a purist in that regard. I like the way the Klingons were made up in TNG and DS9 and Voyager and all that stuff. But yeah, it's very possible. You're definitely right there, Ashlyn. It could be something where they're from a different part of Kronos, but it's like, if they are, how come we never saw those types of Klingons throughout the Klingon Empire? We've seen enough Klingons on the screen, right? That I think at some point we would have seen some representation of every part of Kronos.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. We never see albino Klingons in in any of the other shows, but they probably exist. Who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be possible. There's a very, very, very a small amount of them. The episode Blood Oath that I just watched, didn't they mention? I think they mentioned something about the albino Klingon, right?
Oh, yes, that's true. There is,
So there is that, but he still has hair though. Like he's not bald and just not looking Klingon like. But it's possible, I guess. Maybe there's just so few of them. I mean, you think about like with the Andorians and the Enar, right? And we see Hemmer in Strange New Worlds, and he's representing the Enar for the first time outside of those couple of Enterprise episodes. And you see Enar serving in Starfleet for the first time ever. So
true.
It'd be possible.
I think the thing that would cause the most chaos of all is if Worf looked like a Discovery Klingon when he comes back from Picard. Wouldn't that be a nightmare?
Oh, not only that be a nightmare, I'd turn my TV off and then probably throw it. But I will say that the preview they showed of him in the trailer where he's like all great, he's got like gray eyebrows and a great. I don't know.
I liked it.
I liked it too. Yeah.
I don't know. I have some concerns about it. Maybe it'll grow on me. Like I said, they're going to have to explain a lot in there, and I think you're right, Ashley. I think they're not going to be able to explain enough in Picard, because Picard season 3 is not all about Worf's backstory. I know Michael Dorn has been advocating for a long time to have like a Captain Worf series, and for a character that appeared more than almost any other character in the whole franchise, why not?
Yeah. I think he's literally like tied with Spock, or they're, around the same of appearances, just over
he's more than Spock.
He's more, because he has 14 at least, just from it's insane. Or like Worf is just so powerful, and he should get his own series, please. Like we've all been begging. My
favorite character in the whole franchise is Chief O'Brien, because he's that blue collar working man with the family, so I can relate to him. And I love the Chief, and he also was in a ton of episodes between TNG and DS9, and I would be thrilled to see him get his own series. But then I would kind of get worried that we'd be getting into the Star Wars realm where Disney has hosed Star Wars and say, hey, we're just going to throw everything at you. We don't even care if it's good or not. We're just going to make a whole bunch of stuff and put it out there. So that's the only thing that concerns me. But I thought it'd be kind of fun if each one of us goes through and talks about maybe our favorite, and if you have one, our least favorite Klingon. So
Right.
let's ladies go first here. So Ashton, let's start with you. Who is your favorite Klingon? Which I think you already mentioned this, but do you have a least favorite Klingon on top of that?
Yeah. Tough question. I'm gonna go with Worf as my favorite just because he's the man. I love Worf. I would probably say least favorite Klingon, and I don't even remember his name, but he appears in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. He's one of the Klingons who is on Nimbus 3, who's the representation for Kronos on the peace planet they're trying to build, where originally like weapons weren't allowed, and then the planet just like went to shit totally. He's just portrayed as like a drunken mess, and he's supposed to be
yeah.
like the best of us.
Now I remember him when you said drunken mess. I was like, oh
feel
yeah.
like his name is probably like Cord, or like it's some kind of, it starts with a K. It sounds like a sound.
And a phlegm sound, you're you know.
Yeah. I just feel like they could have made, like, I love the Romulan who appears in that movie. I think she's awesome. She's like, oh, hello. And even like David Warner is the human. Like, that's awesome. I wish like if they had sent someone from Kronos who's like representing the Klingons, I would expect him to be someone cool. So he just like failed all my expectations.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
And Worf is your favorite. We know that.
Yeah,
so.
Worf's my fave.
Yeah. Rhianna, what about you?
Huge
Your
Worf fan.
maybe your favorite Klingon, and if you have a least favorite.
Well, I mean, of course, like Worf is so high on that list. But I think honestly, I will have to go with Kalar, because even though she had so few appearances, she just really inspires me so much to just like Chris was saying with the confidence stuff too, you know, like Kalar just comes onto the ship after being like in stasis or whatever, and she's just like, hello, I'm here, I'm the ambassador, let's go. Like, and she's just,
Rhianna, for listeners who don't know, can you explain who Kalar is?
yeah. Sure. Yeah, she is she's Alexander's mother, actually, and her and Worf had some fun times on the holodeck to create Alexander. And she's also the ambassador for the Klingons for a while before she tragically loses her life. And she's only in 2 episodes, but like she's just so epic. And honestly, least favorite Klingon, I mean, I don't know. I think like a lot of the movie Klingons in the TOS movies are just sort of cringe, like Ashlyn was saying, just like either just let's put your generic Klingon on there who's just like shouting in Klingon and saying fire and all of that. So I think it's more just when it's like a stereotype that I'm just like, I'm not a fan of that. There's a Klingon, especially now, we get so many great representations of all these different types of Klingons that when I just see like power hungry BS, I'm like, all right, anyway, let's move on.
Yeah. All right, Chris, what about you? You got a favorite and least favorite?
I do have a favorite other than Worf. I mean, Worf would be the favorite, but the second favorite. So the second favorite is actually a villain from Star Trek VI, General. It's either General Kang. Yeah.
Right?
So I love him. He's you know, he's quoting Shakespeare all the time, and he's just a very, very a colorful and confident and outgoing villain, and charismatic. And I love that he's shouting Shakespeare as he's going into those battles too. So yeah, he would definitely be one of my favorites. And then my least favorite Klingon would be from, I don't even remember exactly which one it was, but I think it was this that happened, but from Star Trek 3, Klingon that killed David, Kirk's son.
Yes.
Commander Krug.
Yeah. He was on my list too. Yeah.
Yes. That'd be my least favorite because he killed Kirk's son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Zach, what do you got?
Well, yeah. So it's a crazy thing, these parallel alternate universe realities where Doc Brown kills Kirk's son.
Yeah.
It's quite crazy. If those of you listening don't know, Christopher Lloyd, who played Doc Brown in the greatest movies of all time, Back to the Future, was Commander Krug, who kills Kirk's son. Yeah. So that's interesting choice. So my favorite, I would say outside of Worf, because Worf's definitely at towards the very top. I would probably say General Martok. I found him in the beginning. He was just this general, right? When they first introduced him in DS9, he's just this general who's, you know, kind of high up in the Klingon Empire fighting. He's got the eye of Gowron really likes him. He's kind of like Gowron's, you know, I guess chief of staff, sort of, if you want to call it that or equate that to something for us humans. But there's more complexity to him, you know, and his wife is hilarious. the whole thing where I'm afraid of her, that whole thing was hysterical. I just, that the whole interplay, and then how he takes Worf in. He realizes that Worf is, in Klingon terms, kind of an orphan, right? Because he doesn't have a house. So he brings Worf in. He kind of treats Worf like a son and a best friend. And so there's a lot of complexity to Martok. And then, of course, being replaced by a changeling and being stuck in that Dominion, it's not a jail, but it's like it's on an asteroid. Yeah, it's like an encampment or whatever, right? And he keeps fighting every day. They throw him into the pit and he keeps fighting. He loses his eye. Like, he keeps on fighting. Like, he is the pinnacle definition of someone for loyalty, dignity, all the things that we've talked about that kind of embolden what a Klingon is, and then some. But he's more complex than just your average brute in the background, like kind of you had mentioned, Rhianna, just some random dude who's shouting, phlegm sounding noises from the back or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
My least favorite is probably from Star Trek 3, and he is Klingon background number 4. No, I'm just kidding. That was a play, Chris, off of that character I talked about from Andor. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if I have a least favorite Klingon. I kind of like them all for various reasons. I mean, Commander Krug I like just mostly because he's played by Christopher Lloyd. So it's hard to hate Doc Brown. But yeah, I don't know. I will say, okay, ladies, don't hate me for this, but what the Duras sisters did to the Enterprise D in Generations is borderline
inexcusable.
It's borderline unforgivable. They destroyed one of the most gorgeous ships in all of Star Trek. I mean, the Enterprise D it's the gold standard for Federation ships, that Galaxy class, that iconic. I mean, I know the original Enterprise is, but the D is iconic. So the fact that they helped take the D down, and I love the E, it's beautiful, but I have a hard time getting past that. So don't hate me, but the Duras sisters are up there on some of the least, like, I love them as characters and watch them and stuff, but I mean, what they did was so hard to get over.
That's a cross we have to bear. Absolutely.
Totally.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Both ships, the original series, original Enterprise and D, were destroyed in like Klingon situations, so it's not a good look.
That's
not a good look.
Right.
It's not. Yeah, it's tainted their resume. I'll just tad bit.
It's true.
For sure. And I also, I totally, we haven't even mentioned, or we briefly mentioned Kern, Worf's brother, but I just also want to shout out Kern because he is absolutely essential in bringing the Klingons together to go for Gowron. In, I think it's Redemption, when they're having the Civil War. Like, Kern gets all of his friends to help in the Civil War, and he really keeps the peace. So what would we be without Kern,
That's true.
Yes, shout out to Kern.
Love
I have
Kern.
another shout out too. I remembered Michael Dorn when he plays the lawyer in Undiscovered Country. He's
Worf's
like
grandfather.
Worf's grandfather. So epic, and I love him in his big robes, and he's just like, objection, and it's just like the coolest ever. So I have to shout out as well.
Yeah, and Tony Todd, who played Kern, was also the older Jake Sisko in that super touching episode. And I'm blanking on the name of the visitor. Yeah. One of the most emotionally driven episodes in DS9, besides Far Beyond the Stars, which is almost unwatchable because of the emotions of it, and of course the finale. But
it's only a paper moon.
Oh gosh, don't get me started. Anyways, I know it's not a DS. I'm gonna try not to make this into a DS9 episode because I'm tempted here. I am curious though. Now there's going to be some biases here, I'm sure, but what series of Star Trek do you believe, or do you feel personally, did the most advancement for Klingons and like bringing them and their culture and everything to life on screen?
I mean, I'm gonna be biased, but Deep Space Nine is my answer. I think that I was gonna say TNG, but sometimes I feel like there's a couple TNG episodes that even now, like, yes, as a kid, I thought were boring, but even now I rewatch and like, I'm not super interested in, is Kalis actually returned? And are we like gonna have an episode with him? Like a lot of that kind of lore stuff, if at least for me, doesn't hit the mark as well. And so I think having the Klingons in a really intrinsic battle and being like a key player in that in Deep Space Nine, as well as having them sort of be very transient, like, you know, they're really coming and going to the station, but there is whole sections where we get to learn so much about their culture and so much about the family that sort of like is interwoven into that. And so I think Deep Space Nine for me.
And Rhianna, I'm going to use your argument for my answer, which is TNG, because
Yeah, great, love it.
it's the series that lifts the Klingons out of kind of obscurity and gives them this rich background and gives them some like great meat, some great stories to tell. And we wouldn't have all of this Klingon lore without the Next Generation. So I'm just happy that they decided to expand on the culture, especially by placing Worf on the bridge of the Enterprise.
Yeah. What about you, Chris?
Well, it's got to be TNG, Zach. Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Absolutely, it does. Because I think it does. TNG is the first one where you see them completely differently, right? And then they had been villains in the TOS Star Trek movies, but now you've got Worf as a very, very important person on the Federation flagship. So I think when you look at it that way, in terms of advancing the stories of Klingons, that was huge. That was momentous. So yeah, having that on TNG. Yeah. And getting Picard in there and to help Worf out with his family situation and advancing and kind of getting into the realm that of those realms was great too. So that's what I would say is TNG. But I'm thinking you've got DS9. You're thinking DS9, right?
Oh, think again.
Yeah.
Actually, okay.
Something else?
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
I am going to play Sweden here in this regards and say it's a tie for me between TNG and DS9. I can't give one over the other, and here's why. So they're both for different reasons. Like TNG brought Klingons, I think, into the forefront as being more than just villains, like what was we know from TOS and from the original series movies, and things like that. And they gave us arguably the greatest Klingon character in all of Star Trek and Worf, right? You could debate that, but I think majority of us here would probably agree Worf might be our favorites overall. TNG brought us a lot of, like what you said, Ashlyn, that this depth and complex and richness to the character. They put meat on the bones, so to speak, for that species. DS9, however, I think goes even deeper than what TNG does. So TNG gives us Worf and one of the greatest Star Trek characters, but DS9 goes into a much deeper level of complexity, I think, than TNG does. So I think for both those reasons, it's going to be a stalemate, just like it has been on this episode of our podcast of which series was the greatest, and DS9 and TNG going head to head. It could be our great nerd debate number 3 of which is the best Star Trek series, TNG or DS9. We've done 2 of those, by the way, ladies, with the great nerd debates. The first one was Star Trek versus Star Wars, and which was the greatest franchise of all time. And then we also did a great nerd debate number 2, which was what was the greatest decade for movies, just movies in cinema history. And we narrowed it down to the 80s versus the 90s. And we debated that.
Wow,
so
that's tough. Yeah.
It could be the great nerd debate number 3 coming soon to a podcast near you.
I like that idea. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be excellent. That'd be good.
Would be epic. There could be things thrown and lots of very emotionally charged discussion on DS9 versus TNG, but then again, I do love TNG, almost as much. I mean, it's so hard for me. It's like choosing which of my children are the favorite. I can't do that. I love them both equally for various reasons. So it's so hard. It's like when I say 1A and 1B for me personally, with those two, it really is. And there are moments where I have a little bit of a tip one way or the other, but yeah, it's hard. So I guess I'm kind of giving you a non-answer on the best series for Klingons.
Yeah.
Normally I will take a stand one way or the other, and I'll stand behind it. But on this one, it's really hard. It's really hard to say one way or the other.
So does anyone actually have a batleth, or you're working towards getting? I don't think you have one, Zach, and Ashlyn, you're working towards getting one.
Working towards it,
yeah. Eventually, that's the goal.
I've tried not to tell too many people I don't have a batleth because I'm afraid they'll pull my Trekkie card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause I feel like everybody who's anybody has a batleth, it seems like these days. Everybody can, especially with 3D printers and all that stuff. But I
True.
don't have one. No.
It's okay. I do not have one either. So I don't have a batleth either.
You've
Okay. All of us are, yeah.
we're all in the lower part of Trek society.
Apparently, yeah, or at least
Batleth
Klingon
in sight.
society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are not honored houses amongst the Klingons.
No.
But
Yeah.
one of the
You're the
things,
Dur-
yeah,
You're the
yeah.
Duras sisters. You guys should probably get one, right?
Yeah.
I know, right? Yeah,
The
luckily,
Duras sisters.
yeah, luckily I got both of us the Lursa and B'Etor action figures. So we each have one,
Nice.
you know, for our desk and stuff. So at least we're representing in that way. But
And
Do they
They
come
have
with a toy
batleths.
batleth? Oh, okay,
Yes.
good. So yeah,
Yeah.
you do have one. Then it's just miniaturized.
they're just
It's
little,
very
yeah.
small.
They're good for
Yeah.
fighting small mice and lizards.
Yes,
That's pretty much it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Some of what I was thinking about with the batleth and how they with the Klingon culture, right? So they've brought in the idea of martial arts. Like you can see that with Worf, because he's actually teaching martial arts on the Enterprise, and you see him like perform his different martial arts activities too. But they bring in the idea of that, the batleth and martial arts and honor and kind of the way of the warrior and all of that, right, throughout. I see it at least from TNG and DS9. Maybe not so much in the original TOS or the original movies there, but that's what I was kind of seeing in terms of for Worf, and specifically like how he behaves and how he follows like a certain warrior code, and then his belief in this archetype of warrior codes, and then his belief in trying to learn as much like martial arts and how to use the batleth too. So that has always fascinated me, like the connection that they've got in those. So just curious what you guys think about that, or some of the standout kind of moments or episodes that you've seen.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking about I think it's looking for Parmok in all the wrong places where Worf has to like pretty much set up his like body so that he can control Quark's movements with the batleth because he has to fight for Lady Groka. It's just iconic.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
we get to see what a great warrior Worf is.
Yeah.
Just the fact that he's fighting someone who's not there, you know, through someone
Yes.
else's body and still kicking butt. And I also am thinking about the times that Worf was trying to teach Alexander how to use the batleth and sort of showing him around like the different types of ceremonial objects. I love getting to see him because it reminds me of just like anyone teaching their kids about an important thing in their religion or important artifact or something that like, oh, we pray to this, or oh, this is something that we use in battle. And like he has his mek'leth and he has his awesome batleth. And so talking about how it's the extension of your arm and all of that kind of stuff is just so cool to really flesh out his character even more and get to see him interact with those ceremonial objects is really cool.
Absolutely. I think of Klingons and Worf especially as like a very like fit culture. You know, I mean, not everyone obviously, but it's very valued that you have to be a good fighter, you have to be a warrior. Which is interesting because most of the battles that we see are space battles. So you don't have to like know martial arts to like press a button to shoot your enemies, but they carry on that tradition no matter how far they go out in space. And I mean, I'm such a huge like fantasy medieval fan as well as a sci-fi nerd. And a lot of like what Worf is trying to teach Alexander, obviously it's not working. Alexander has no interest in becoming a martial artist. But other Klingons visit Worf and say, your son's like 7. He should be able to do this, like these 5 things. And he can't. And that's very shameful. And it reminds me of like in medieval culture, like, you know, training to become a knight, or if you're, like I'm thinking in Game of Thrones, like if you're a king or growing up in like society, it's like expected of you to be trained in how to use a bow and how to use a sword from a very young age. And that's like, if you're a man, you have to be taught in those ways. Otherwise, like, what else are you doing? You have to learn to become a soldier. And it was just interesting to see like how poor Alexander's failing to meet those expectations. And Worf, you know, growing up in Russia with his human parents, had none of those expectations on him. And so he just rose to the occasion because he's like, I'm a Klingon. That's what I got to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Ashlyn Rhianna, we really thank you so much for coming on with us. This has been really fun. Just talking Klingons. I know I throw a little bit of Ferengi in there, but I mean, in general, talking about Klingons, I mean, they really are such an integral part of Star Trek. And obviously, because that's your, podcast namesake, right? The Duras Sisters and that culture and that alien race. I've had a blast. I think it's great getting a chance to kind of dive into a one particular alien race in Star Trek and talk a lot about them and their culture and you begin to see the complexity. You begin to see the ever growing list of episodes that they're in and the importance of those episodes, because those Klingon centric episodes. They're not just important to Klingons. A lot of those episodes are important to furthering stuff with the Federation or talking more about another alien race, like you said, Rhianna, with looking for Parmok in all the wrong places and seeing Quark getting a chance to fight it with a batleth with the help of Worf, at least for most of it. And it's really fun. It's been a lot of fun talking about Klingons.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we got to do this. We were kind of talking before the pod, like how we all kind of have similar style of podcast and like wanted to sort of do these deeper dives. And I'm so glad that we were able to make this happen, because it's just really fun to take a topic and just talk about it as much as we want. I had a blast.
Absolutely. And I'm really happy that we're doing a podcast exchange, because next week we'll be recording where you come onto our podcast and we're going to talk about random red shirts. So that's going to be absolutely fantastic episode as well.
The list of memes never ends with those. My favorite one being that the stormtrooper shoots the random red shirt, he misses and he dies anyways. So it's that epic one. There's certainly lots of memes. There's a lot of, you think about the red shirts too, right? I mean, there's the obviously the random red shirt who dies in the away mission, the meme where it says Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Scotty beamed down the planet surface, and Ensign Ricky beamed down the planet surface. Guess which one's not coming home, and so things like that. But but don't forget there are captains who wear red shirts too. So there could be some interesting stuff there too. But yeah, we've really enjoyed having you on and getting a chance to do this collaboration or, cross parallel universe thing, whatever you want to call it in nerd terms, with you guys. It's been a lot of fun. And we look forward to chatting with you next week on your guys' podcast.
Yeah, we can't wait. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
thank you. That's right. Yes.
Applause. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So for those of you listening, be sure to go on to social media if you have Instagram or Facebook or any of their major platforms, YouTube, whatever, and look up the Duras Sisters Podcast. Be sure to follow them on there. Like their page, go on, listen to their podcast. They do a lot of really amazing episodes, obviously Star Trek centric, and some really good deep dives. I love the holodeck series you guys have been doing. That's been very fun and whimsical and a great little approach to talking about Trek. And be sure to stay tuned next week. Once we make that episode and they publish that, we will share that with you guys so you guys can hear the random red shirts and all the talks about the red shirts in Star Trek. It'll be a lot of fun. We look forward to it.
Woohoo. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And again, also, if you're listening, be sure to go onto our Instagram page, Facebook page, and our newly created YouTube channel, where you'll be able to find this video version of this episode with the Duras Sisters, as well as previous celebrity interviews and things, other things like that we've done. Be sure to go on there and check those out. And we look forward to talking to you all soon. So take care, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Random Red Shirt Podcast.